This conference will now be recorded.
Hi, I'm Preston Williams, and welcome to another edition of Jazz Talk. Today on our show, we have a very special guest, and I'm very excited to introduce him. He's been on this scene for over 50 years, and he's what I would call a drummer's drummer. He's played with everyone under the sun, from Miles Davis to Freddie Hubbard. I can go on and on. McCoy Tyner, Chick Corea, Stanley Clark, Herbie Hancock, Shaka Khan, Jaco Pastorius. His name is Lenny White, and he's here with us today. Lenny, welcome to Jazz Talk.
Thank you, Preston.
Thanks so much, man, for coming on the show today. As I said, you've been on the scene for over 50 years. You've played with so many great musicians, and we know about Lenny White, the drummer, but we don't know a lot about your humble beginnings, how this all started. I believe that you are from Queens, New York, and
That's right.
yeah,
Jamaica.
okay. How'd you get into music, and how'd you start playing drums, Lenny?
Well, my parents were into music. They played music around the house all the time.
Okay,
I was, I don't know how I got into music. I mean, like the fact is, I drew as a kid. I was drawing. I was into that, and I guess having the music around my house all the time
hmm
kind of influenced me to want to play. I wanted to play trumpet.
really?
Yeah, and I don't know what made me gravitate to drums, but
hmm
I wanted to play trumpet, and then I got to play with some great trumpet players. So, you know,
That's amazing, man. Now one of the things that I find very interesting, you're a left-handed drummer that plays on a right-handed kit. Explain that, man. How is that even possible?
well, basically, um, the only difference is, and well, it's not that different.
Okay,
Different. It's not. But I just play my rod cymbal with my left hand.
gotcha. Okay.
The rod, drum kit is set up like anybody would can play it, But I just play the ride cymbal, and Billy Cobham plays that way,
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
and
Good drummer.
Carter Buford plays that way too,
hmm hmm
you know. So I mean, it's not that I'm the only one that does that. No, and it's actually kind of natural because you don't have to do this crossover thing when you play. The
Right.
hi hats on this side, so. Um, but yeah, I naturally gravitated that way. I mean, when I picked up the sticks to start to play, that's the way it went, you know.
That's the way it went. And you're basically self-taught.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now, during that time period coming up, I guess, in the 50s, 60s, late 50s, early 60s, were you playing in local bands like in your area before you started
Sure,
playing professionally?
sure. There was our mentor in the neighborhood was a gentleman by the name of Weldon Irvine.
Okay.
He came from Hampton, Virginia, and he settled in Jamaica, Queens.
Jamaica. Okay.
And some of the people that played with him, you might know uh, Billy Cobham,
Yes, of course.
Marcus Miller,
Marcus Miller. Yep.
uh, Bernard Wright, um, myself. There's a lot of people that played with Weldon,
Wow.
and he had a big band, and he had some small groups, and so we got to play a lot of different kinds of musics, which was
Mm.
good.
hmm
I tell this story all the time. I mean, for us, we wanted to be able to be authentic
Yeah.
with any kind of music that we played.
Right.
And so that was the thing for us. So I'd play a wedding reception and we'd have to play so many different kinds of musics.
Yeah.
And I had gone to Miles Davis's house and I played him a cassette of George Cable's, Clint Houston, Steve Grossman, and myself playing James Brown's Lickin' Stick. And that's how Steve Grossman got hired by Miles Davis to play Miles Davis's wedding.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Powerful. Now, in the 60s, you hooked up with Jackie McLean, the great altoist. How did you get the gig with Jackie? Because interestingly enough, I noticed there's a pattern. Tony played with him, then Jack played with him, then you played with him, and even later on with Bitches Brew was that same thing again. Tony, Jack, and Lenny. How did you get to play with Jackie McLean?
Well, word got out that like I was kind of a young guy that was playing pretty good,
Yeah.
and I got a call from Jackie McLean,
Wow.
and I went and played with him. And that band that I played with, that first band that I played with, was Jackie, Woody Shaw,
Wow.
Harold Mayburn, and Scotty Hope played bass.
That's
So
incredible.
Woody and I played together in a couple of different bands. We played together with Jackie McLean and then with Joe Henderson too.
Wow. Great musicians. I mean, you think about Woody Shaw, one of the unsung trumpet players, one of the greatest. Miles even said, that's a trumpet player right there. He
Oh
loved
yeah,
Shaw.
yeah.
But tell us about something significant happened in your life in August of 1969. You got a call to play with Miles Davis. You were only 19 years old. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe you were referred to Miles by Tony Williams, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, what happened was Tony had done In a Silent Way.
Right.
And, Tony brought John McLaughlin over from England
Mm-hmm.
to play in his band. And Miles Davis heard John, and John showed up on In a Silent Way. And
Wow.
Tony walked in, and there's John, who's supposed to be playing in his band.
Mm-hmm.
So Tony and Miles had a little riff, and Tony said to Miles that he wouldn't play with him anymore.
Right.
And so when Miles did Bitches Brew, he wanted to do something with two drummers. And Jack had been playing with him at the time, so they needed somebody else to play.
Mm-hmm.
And on Tony's recommendation, I got the call. So,
Wow, man, that's
and
nothing better.
he actually recommended me for Red Clay also because Freddie had called Tony to do
Mm-hmm.
Red Clay,
Right.
and Wayne. I mean, no, but Herbie and Tony and Ron had been doing a lot of record dates
Mm-hmm.
at that time,
That was
and
on
so
that CTI label, wasn't it? Something like that.
well, no, well that was CTI, but they were doing a lot of record dates for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
They were the rhythm section for a lot of different recordings at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
Miles was kind of miffed about that because his rhythm section was and so they made a pact that they would not record together as a unit on other people's records.
Hmm.
So when Freddie called Ron and Herbie, then Herbie said, "Well, why don't you get Lenny to play?" So that's how I got Red Clay also.
Interesting. Now, what you told a story when you went into the studio to record "Bitches Brew." Um, there was an interesting story. Like I think the cleaning lady or something like that let you in, and you're setting up your drum kit, and I guess maybe you're making some noise. And Miles says over the intercom to Jack, "Hey, tell that guy to be quiet."
No, he said, "Yo, Jack, tell the young drummer to shut up." That was a degree of intimidation.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I
like I
mean,
said,
like that was my first record day. I'm like freaking out,
that's
like
incredible. I mean, think about that. You're 19 years old playing with Miles Davis. Every drummer would want that because the only person who had ever done that was Tony Williams at 17. And here you're doing it. So you also told a story how you were somewhere and you went to like a record store and you looked through the window. You were talking to a guy because you wanted to see that record, that album. And it's interesting when you look at the album, and I have it actually right here. This is I cherish this, man. I got everybody's signature on here except Miles. Every time I go to a show, and you remember you signed this for me, and when you
yeah,
saw Herbie's name on it, you said Herbie's not on this.
he's
But
not.
the interesting thing is, yeah, you look at the list, the title, and then you go and look at the names. It's Miles, Wayne Shorter, and then Lenny White. I'm like, wow, you're like the third name on there. I mean, what was that like for you, man, to be 19 years old playing with Miles Davis? Do you feel like I've arrived?
Well, it's very interesting because the two people that you have behind you,
Hmm.
you have Miles Davis and Charlie Parker.
Yes,
When Miles Davis was 19 years old, he played with Charlie Parker.
that's exactly right. Yeah,
So the situation for me was like shattering. I mean, it was a career maker or a career breaker.
yeah, yeah.
And So when I got the opportunity to do it, it was great, and I learned a great deal by doing
Hmm.
that because you go into a situation, and if you don't ask what's needed and wanted, and you just take it upon yourself to decide,
Hmm.
not necessarily that's the right thing to do.
Right.
And I learned from doing that. But
Yeah.
like for me, I mean, we did that record in August of 1969, August 19th through 21st.
Wow, man.
And in October, I woke up out of a dead sleep and said, I recorded by Miles Davis. It took that long for me to
Wow.
grasp that because it was something that I had done that was going to be documented.
Hmm.
And for the rest of my life and anybody's lives after that,
That's
if you
right.
go to that, there was a documentation that this young guy
Hmm.
played with Miles Davis. No one could take that away
Exactly.
because it was documented.
That's
That
incredible.
as a young kid, I used to sign my name on the back of album covers because I wanted to see what it looked like.
Right, right.
So when this record came out, I was in San Francisco and
Hmm.
I was walking down Geary Street and there was a record shop and they were closing at 6 o'clock. They were closing, and they had a sign in the window that said "New Miles Davis
Hmm.
album."
Hmm.
So I knocked on the window and I said, through the glass, I said, "Can you show me that album, please? I just want to see the album."
Wow.
And you know that that's one of the greatest album covers of all time.
Oh, without question, without question. There's also Miles's that and Kind of Blue are his two biggest sellers too. Bitches Brew
Yeah.
and Kind of Blue. But I'm sure at that point, once that recording dropped or came out, I'm sure you probably started getting a lot of offers or people wanting to work with you at that point, right?
Uh, mm, like it was a totally different situation. You have to understand that record came out in 1970. It was recorded in 1969.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the wave. That was the beginning of a wave that was going to change music, especially quote unquote jazz music.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody wasn't just gung ho to go out and do that
Right.
because Miles Davis did it and Tony Williams had done it with Lifetime.
Right.
It was something that was new and people were like, wetting their whistles saying, let me try this. Let's see what it is. But
Right.
it didn't take full shape until probably 71, 72.
71, 72. Wow, interesting. Yeah, and you're right. Miles was the starting catalyst. It seems like when he dropped that recording, everyone went that direction. Jazz musicians, rock musicians, you know, um,
Well, actually, Tony Williams was the
did it first
catalyst.
with
You know,
Lifetime. But Miles was the one that really brought it together, though. As far as
Miles Davis put the credibility in that new direction, which was jazz rock. So you
gotcha.
had two totally diametrically opposed musical forms.
Right.
You had rock and roll and you had jazz. It wasn't fusion. There was rock and roll and there was jazz. And
Mm-hmm.
so Miles Davis, when he did Bitches Brew, his impetus was to, well, of course, to change a musical direction. But
Right.
he thought that rock and roll was limited.
Mm-hmm.
And if the guys really played rock and roll, it should be played like this. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was his version of rock and roll. And so that's why you have the jazz police
Right.
and the rock and roll police saying, "Oh, wait a minute, hold up, you're not supposed to do these kinds of things."
Right.
There was progressive music. There were bands like Yes and King Crimson and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
bands like that that were doing things. There was the Free Spirits. Actually, Larry Coryell, like had a band called the Free Spirits, I believe it was. But
Mm-hmm. Yep. That was
he
1968. I have that. Yep.
right, and he was doing stuff like that, and like so, up until I think it was 1967 Miles in the Sky, it's the first time Miles had used a guitar. He had George
George
Benson
Benson. That's right.
play guitar, you know. So this was something new. And, you know, towards after a year or two after that, yeah, of course, I started to get calls because of the fact that I had done that. But, 1970,
Right.
I did Red Clay.
Red Clay with Freddie Hubbard. That's right.
I did Woody Shaw's album,
Hmm.
Blackstone Legacy.
Yeah, you
And
were
I did a
working.
record. I did a record with Andrew Hill
That's
called
right.
Passing
Passing
Ships.
Ships. Yeah, I got that.
That didn't come out until 20 years after that, 20,
That's
30
right.
years after that.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
So there were things that were starting to move in that direction,
Mm,
but they hadn't moved in that direction, you know, right away.
gotcha. Gotcha. Now, Lenny, tell me about this group Azteca that you were involved in, man. How did that happen? You don't hear too many people even talk about that band or remember that band. Very few. But tell me about that group. That was before you joined Return to Forever. Close to
Yeah.
the time you got together with Return to Forever.
Azteca was a band uh, that was headed by Coke and Pete Escovedo,
Oh, okay.
who
Okay.
was Sheila's father and uncle.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
Now, um, did you ever read the book Hitman?
No.
There's a book called Hitman, and
Okay.
it's about uh, Walter Yetnikoff
Okay.
and his reign at Columbia Records.
Okay.
And after Yetnikoff, Clive Davis came in.
Mm.
Now, Clive Davis was doing a lot of different kinds of things. Clive Davis was kind of responsible for asking Miles to do something like Bitches Brew.
Mm. Okay.
And Clive Davis, I don't know if it was Walter, but it might have been Clive that signed um, Santana. And
Earth, Wind, and Fire was his first African American group too.
now, yes, now the fact is, Earth, Wind, and Fire got signed, and there was a CBS convention in London at the
Hmm.
Grosvenor House Hotel.
Yeah.
Now, at that convention, if you read the book Hitman, Clive had a new band that he was going to introduce at
Mm.
midnight at the Grosvenor House Hotel and at the CBS convention. That
Okay.
band was Azteca.
Wow. That's
Now,
amazing.
Azteca was a cross between Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Santana.
Okay.
It was a big band that had four horns, four vocalists, three keyboard players,
Wow.
percussion, and drums, bass, and guitar. Paul
Amazing.
Jackson,
Yeah, Paul Jackson.
who played with Herbie, was a bass player.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Harold was the lead trumpet player.
Mm.
Um, Mel Martin played in that band. Neil Sean
Mm-hmm.
played in that band. And it was Coke and Pete Escovedo.
That's amazing, man. Wow.
And it was a great band. It was fun. But that's I met all the Earth, Wind, and Fire guys and everything. So like I go back that far
Yeah. Oh, I
with
know.
those guys.
I
Yeah.
know. Yeah. Now, how did you hook up with Return to Forever? Um, that was, I guess, your next venture, which turned out to be just incredible. You think about the fusion bands of that day, Return to Forever, Mahavishnu Orchestra, and Weather
Jazz
Report.
rock bands, jazz rock, not fusion, jazz rock, jazz rock.
Okay, okay.
How dare you? How dare you? No, no.
That's a bad word. How did you
Well, no,
hook
no,
up?
no, no, no. No, but see, this is okay. I'll tell you, this is what happened. I was in San Francisco
Okay.
playing with Azteca. We had some time off. And I got a call from Chick.
Wow.
Now, Chick and I had played together on Bitches Brew. So I knew Chick.
Mm-hmm.
And Stanley and I had played together with Joe Henderson. We were in Joe Henderson's band together.
Mm-hmm.
So I get a call from Chick, and Chick is they're coming to the Keystone Corner in San Francisco.
Okay.
And Chick says, listen, Airto and Flora are leaving the band, and Stanley and I are coming to San Francisco. Would you like to do a week with us at San Francisco? I
Right.
was already there. I said, yeah, sure. I had played with the both of them before, and it was great. Stanley is one of my favorite musicians.
Mm-hmm.
So we played this week at the Keystone Corner,
Mm-hmm.
and it was unbelievable. It was really, really
Wow.
special. The
Wow.
last night, um, two guitar players sat in, and also Mel Martin, who played in the Azteca,
Ah.
and Mingo Lewis, who played percussion with uh, Santana. They all sat in on the Sunday night, the last night,
Wow.
and the two guitar players that sat in were Barry Finnerty and Billy Connors.
Bill
So,
Connors. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Bill
so
Connors.
at the end of the night, Chick says to me, "Listen, I want to do an electric return because they were doing, like the Flora Purim and Airto thing, and Joe Farrell had played before that. But then
Mm-hmm.
he says, I want to do an electric return to Forever. Would you want to do it? And I said, well, I don't know, Chick. I'm here with Azteca, and I think I want to try to do
Right.
something different and do this. And I think I'm going to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, okay, I understood, understood. So he and Stanley went back to New York, and they got Steve Gadd to
Steve
play.
Gadd.
Now I'm still in San Francisco, so while I'm in San Francisco, a manager, Herbie Herbert, comes to me and he says, "Listen, you have some time off. Would you be into doing a jam with Neil Sean and Ross Valerie?" I said, "Sure, cool." So Neil, Ross, and I played, and they loved it. They were like, "Oh man, this is great!" And I knew Greg Raleigh from Santana.
Mm-hmm.
Because I knew the same. Michael Shreve and I were really good friends,
Right.
and so they say, listen, we're gonna start this band, and we really would like for you to be in this band.
Mm-hmm.
So you have eyes to do it. Now, by this time, Chick had called me again and said, "Man, come on back to New York, man. Come and let's do this thing." Blah, blah. And I said, "Okay, yeah, okay." So now they asked me to be a part of this band, and I said, well, I can't, guys, because I've decided to go back to the East Coast and, do this band with Chick Corea and Stanley Clarke. So I left and did that. But that
Wow.
band was Journey.
You're kidding me. Are
Not
you
at all.
serious? Oh wow, man. That's a
Yeah.
that's a journey. Wow.
Yeah. So I didn't do Journey, and I went back and did Return to Forever.
Just thinking about that, I guess obviously Chick, you had maybe a relationship with him because you guys were, like I said, on Bitches Brew. Maybe he heard something in your playing. But I did read where Chick, and I think Chick and Stanley one time, and I'm not sure you were in the band at the time, they went to see John McLaughlin Mahavishnu Orchestra, and it blew Chick's mind.
Yeah, I
Uh,
did.
he loved it, and you guys went on from there. So obviously, you guys recorded some of those early albums like Light as a Feather, and
No, no, I'm not on Light as a Feather.
oh, you're
That's
not
that's
invited. Oh,
that's
okay.
that's Airto.
Okay,
Uh,
okay.
Him of the Southern Galaxy is the first record that I
In
put
the
out.
Seven Galaxy. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, you guys had Connors at the time. This is before Al Di Meola came in the band. But let me ask you a question, and I'm sure this is Chick's concept. What is Return to Forever? What does it mean? I mean, I'm sure Chick came up with that. Do you know what it actually means? Return to Forever?
It's a state of mind.
Okay. Okay, a state of mind. Okay.
It's a
Yeah.
state of mind. It's a state of mind that best way I could explain it. And like let me, I'm just giving you my perspective on it. It's a state of
Mhm.
mind that always exists, and it's a goal to be in that
Ah,
state of mind.
okay. Beautiful. Now, 1975, you, I believe, released your first record, this one right here, Venusian Summer. I love this recording. What was the concept behind that, Lenny? What were you trying to say on that record?
Well, see, I of all the guys in Return to Forever, I had listened to a lot of, okay, I guess um, progressive rock music.
Hmm.
I was a big Led Zeppelin fan,
Oh, I am
uh,
too.
Jimi Hendrix,
Hmm.
and then I also listened to Yes, King Crimson,
Yeah,
and bands like that. That basically they had projects that were themed.
hmm.
There were projects that like told a story. They were episodic,
I got you. I got you.
and so when we did Romantic Warrior,
Hmm.
that was the first concept record that we did. And
Mm.
I had been talking to the guys about doing a concept record, so that's
Hmm.
what we did.
Right, right.
And like all of those tunes that were on Romantic Warrior kind of fit into a theme. And so for me, I just continued that uh, perspective of doing theme oriented uh, albums or things that actually it's like telling a story.
Mm. You just made me think of something interesting. Wayne Shorter said something similar. Someone was asking him and Joe Zawinu about the type of music they do, and they said we write sagas and epics. That's what
Exactly,
that's what we're
exactly.
into. You
The
know.
music of Return to Forever is episodic music. It's
Mm.
it's it's like classical music. See, this is different because a lot of people say, "Well, man, like they did those things and they're like classical." Blah, 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 blah. No, no. But the fact is that how Return to Forever's music was put together was by energy.
Yeah.
So what happens is somebody writes a tune and Chick writes a tune and he says, right here, you should do something like this that's got this theme that it's kind of like a classical energy. So that energy was put into that tune. So when
Hmm.
you hear No Mystery and you hear these things or whatever, when you hear Romantic Warrior, you hear these parts that like classical. That's the
Hmm.
energy that was put into that music. It wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily a style, a musical genre, but it was a musical energy.
Yeah.
And just like jazz music has an energy, classical music has an energy too, just like rock has an energy.
Yeah.
And so basically, if you think about that music that we did, which came to be called fusion, it was a fusion of different musical energies.
Mm.
And that's why it did that. And that's why it sounded the way it sounded.
Lenny, one thing that I loved about you guys were probably one of the only bands during that time. You guys, for instance, your performance on the Old Gray Whistle Test. You guys are playing like electric, and then you guys switch over. So we're going to do some acoustic music, as you said. I'm going to play some acoustic drums. But this recording right here, I got all the signatures on this one, and my favorite is No Mystery, man. That's got to be the baddest jam ever. But I love this album cover, and
I
also,
hated it. I hated
oh,
it because
really, you didn't like
no,
it?
but no, because if you pick the album cover up, pick it up. Let me show you something here. I never forget because Chick comes into the studio and he says, "Man, I got the album cover, got the album cover." He goes and he shows it like this, and I said, "Oh man." He said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I said, like if you look at that, there's like this I guess lava lamp thing,
Yeah, yeah.
and like that actually that's a better. They've changed it, but there used to be. See that little thing right above my name,
Right,
that
right.
black spot? It was over my eye. I looked like Petey
Oh.
the dog in Little Rascals, and I hated it, man. So like, yeah, that's.
And
I'm
then
glad you. I'm glad you
the
like
back
it.
too is
Yeah,
cool too, yeah, as well.
yeah, yeah.
And but this one is one of my favorites to a masterpiece. I got all of you guys to sign this too.
Right,
Romantic
right.
Warrior. Now tell me, what was the concept? What was that recording about? What is Romantic Warrior? What were you guys trying to say?
Well, but you can look at the cover. The
Hmm.
the, the cover was it was a medieval theme.
Mm.
And so that medieval theme, is medieval overture, sorceress, duel of the jester and the tyrant.
Man,
All of those were
beautiful.
medieval themes. And
Yeah.
just like when I did Venusian Summer, that
Right.
was my whole thing. There were themes that went to that.
Interesting.
And I've always admired classical music because of the way it made me feel. I was
Mm.
I loved melodies,
Hmm.
and the greatest instrument in the world is an orchestra.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you the great composers were able to take that instrument and do amazing things with it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that in listening to classical music, no, I didn't get the effect of like uh, when it says Opus 73 or whatever.
Hmm.
That back in those times it was pretty mathematical and da 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 tick, tick, like. But when you think about Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy,
Hmm.
what is a sugar plum fairy? The fact that you hear the music and you say, and you have visions of what a sugar plum fairy is because the composer composed music that was imagery.
Hmm.
And so, from that perspective, I kind of embraced that. And Chick embraced that. And all of us embraced that in what it is that we did. So, we would write music that actually depicted a particular image as opposed
Mm.
to just being music.
Wow.
And so that's how that. And when you talk to Wayne and Joe, it's the same concept. The same concept is to take an image and use some notes to depict that image. And so what you do is with people see. For me, what I like to do is to create audio movies. So you say what something is, and people put on headphones or they close their eyes and they listen to the music and they get what that is.
Yeah.
That's a true sense or true acquired skill as a composer
Mm.
to be able to do that, to be able to take musical notes and depict something that is visual. And so that with the great jazz rock fusion bands.
Right. Right.
That's what happened. See, later on when it was fusion,
Hmm.
then people were playing just grooves, and it
Right.
didn't matter.
Right. Yeah.
But it was detailed in the compositions that the jazz rock bands wrote.
Mm. One of the things that I would always blow my mind when I was looking at your resume of people that you played with, seems like you played with the greatest pianist of the last 50, 60 years, whether it's Herbie, Chick, or McCoy. Same thing with bass players, Stanley, Jocko, and Marcus Miller.
And
And
Ron Carter
Ron Carter too.
and Buster Williams
And Buster Williams, yeah, of course.
And Victor Bailey.
Victor Bailey. So many, man. I can't even name all of them. 1977, you came out with this one. You signed this one for me too. Big City. One of the things that I like about this, you sort of introduced a young Marcus Miller, because I think the only other person he had played with was Bobby Humphrey, if I'm not mistaken. And you came out with this in 77. You had Verdine of Earth, Wind, and Fire and Marcus on this. How did you get to work with young Marcus Miller? Was he just doing sessions at that time, or how did you get to work with him?
I met Marcus. He was playing with Weldon Ravine.
Okay.
Marcus and Omar Hakim.
Omar Hakim, yeah, who later was the drummer for Weather Report after, I
Hmm.
believe, Peter Erskine, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
And you know Marcus and Omar and Donald Blackman.
Mm-hmm.
They had played with Weldon, so I got to meet them. And when I was putting the band together, um, they were recommendations, and
Mm.
they lived in my neighborhood.
Right,
It
right.
wasn't like I had to go outside the neighborhood. I could, and I would say, man, these cats are bad cats. Yo, this, yeah, no. And,
Yeah.
and so I've known Marcus, you know, all of his life.
All of his life. Wow, he's one of the great bass players.
Oh yes, he is.
What
Yes.
was it like, Lenny? What was it like playing with Jocko on his first recording? Marcus Miller told me when Jocko put out his self-titled album, it blew everybody's mind because it was almost like never heard anything like this. It sounded like what he was doing with harmonics. It was just revolutionary. And I think Herbie Hancock wrote something on the liner notes. But what was it like playing with Jocko? Because you played with those two, Stanley and Jocko. Stanley, of course, was first. And those were pretty much the two premier bass players of the 70s. I think along with maybe Anthony Jackson. But what was it like playing with Jocko?
Okay, I'll give you my perspective.
Okay.
Jocko's a great bass player, great bass player. But I'm gonna tell you two related stories here. You know, I played with Stanley Clarke and Ron Carter
Yes.
before I played with Jocko.
Right.
So when everybody came on and said, you know, Jocko's the greatest bass player, I took issue with that. I took issue with that because of the fact that I had played with, again, Ron Carter and Stanley Clarke.
Right.
And Stanley Clarke is an acoustic bass player.
Yes.
Stanley Clarke made his name playing electric bass.
Mm-hmm.
I picked up Stanley Clarke's electric bass and I took my thumb and showed him how to play this thumb technique. And he said, man, what are you doing? I said, check this out. This is some new stuff here, man. Because I had seen Larry Graham
That's
and
right.
Doug Roush and these
James
guys,
Jamerson too.
and I was doing that. And Stanley took it and made it his
Yeah.
by how he did it.
Mm-hmm.
But Stanley is an amazing musician
You just
and a great acoustic bass player.
and a brilliant composer too.
Yes, no, but then when he picked up the electric bass and started playing the electric bass, it returned to forever, and then beyond,
Yeah.
it became a whole new thing. So here it is. I played with Jocko, and Jocko's stuff was really great. It was fantastic. He was a great bass player. And when I made the record, I said, well, you know, it's cool. It's a good record. I never knew that it was going to be an earth shattering,
Right. Right.
you know, paradigm shifting thing, you know. And, you know, Jocko was great. Now we go, what, 15 years after that, 10 years after that. And I get a bass player that's in my band now. And the bass player comes to me and he says, man, I need to talk to you. I said, what's going on? He said, man, you know, I listen to Jocko, man, and everything I do when I play sounds like Jocko. I mean, how do I get out of that?
Mm.
I said, keep continuing to try to sound like Jocko.
Interesting. You have to find your voice. I've
No,
heard
but
in
what's
order to find
right?
your voice, you have to play. Yeah, I've heard something like that before.
But the moral to this story, or the antidote to the story, is who the bass player was, and that was Marcus Miller.
Wow.
Marcus found
Wow.
his own style, baby.
Yeah, he told me I met Marcus a couple times. He told me that Jocko he was somewhere and Jocko was in a hotel with his wife and Jocko found out that Marcus is in the hotel. He says, "Man, come up here and get your bass lesson." And yeah,
That
yeah,
sounds like Jocko. That
yeah.
sounds like Jocko. You know?
But man, that was just great stuff. Now let's fast forward a little bit after Return to Forever, after you guys disbanded or broke up in the late '70s, I believe it was early '80s. I think you were responsible for some type of thing called Echoes of an Era, where you got the guys back together and you brought in Shaka Khan or something like, if I'm not mistaken. Tell us about that, man.
Well, I had done. I don't know. I don't know if that's before. I think it maybe was before the Jamaica Boys. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I had gotten to this point where like I had done all of these different things with different people,
Right.
and I was rekindling old friendships, musical friendships.
Right.
And so I had started to produce records by then. And I had an idea, and I went to Bruce Lundvall, who was the head of Electro Musician at that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I said, Bruce, I have an idea Well, first off, I Shaka did an album where she did her version of Night in Tunisia with Arif Martin,
I've heard that. Yeah.
and it was great. I listened to it and I said, because she had done a record with me.
Hmm.
She did Streamline with
Right.
me, and we did Lady Madonna, you know, which was she killed it. She was great.
Yeah. Yeah. She's great. She is.
And so I listened. I said, man. So I go to Bruce Lundvall and I say, Bruce, I got an idea for a record that would be kind of great. He said, what is it? I said, I want to recreate the Lady Day sessions with contemporary musicians. He
Oh.
said, oh man, that's pretty cool. Who do you want to use? I said, I want to get Shaka Khan to sing, and I want to get all my former employers. I want Freddie Hubbard. I want Joe Henderson.
Hmm.
I want Jackie McLean. And I want Chick Corea.
Mm.
So Jackie wasn't available,
Right.
but he said, that's a great idea. Call them up, and if you can get them, let's do it. I said, okay. So I
Wow.
called Shaka. I said, Shocks, what do you think about doing a jazz record? He said, me? I said, yeah, I think you can do it. I really do feel that you could sing jazz the way that you sing, you know.
Right.
She said, well, you know, who are you going to get? I said, I'm going to get Freddie Hubbard. I'm going to get Joe Henderson. I'm going to get Chick Corea. And I'm going to get Stanley Clark. She said, wow, well, if they're down, I'm down. I said,
Oh.
okay, I'll let you know. So I called Freddie Hubbard up and I said, yo, Hub, you want to make a jazz record with Shaka Khan? Shaka Khan? Who else you going to have on it? I'm going to have Joe. I'm going to have Stanley. And I'm going to have Chick. Well, they'll do it. I'll do it. I said,
Yeah.
okay. I called Chick. I said, Chick, could you? Well, if they'll do it, I'll do it. Everybody had the same answer. And so that's how that happened.
Man, that was some good stuff that you guys did too. You just made me think of something when you were talking, just getting back real quick to Stanley. Stanley told me a number of years ago, I was talking to him. He actually said that he and Jocko had planned to do something together. They were going to do a tour together. And I guess, Jocko being bipolar, I guess he started getting sick around that time. But that actually, he said people thought we were base rivals, but we were actually good friends. And he said Jocko was always
They're
good,
from
good
Philly.
to my son. Yeah, both. That's right. That's
Well, I
right.
mean, no. Jocko's father lived in Philly. And he would come to see his father a lot. And, a
Mm,
lot of times, we'd be in Philly and, they would be there together. And, like it was, see, Joe Zawinul was the kind of guy that uh, he was totally competitive,
oh, I know. I know. Yeah.
and
You know
and
about
and, and so he and Jocko fit well
Mm-hmm.
because when Jocko comes in and says, "I'm the greatest bass player in the world,"
Right.
and Joe says, "Well, I'm the greatest keyboards player in the world, and you need to be in the greatest band in the world." It's
Right.
so
Right.
deep because after after I left Return to Forever
Right.
in '76, end of '76 and '77, Joe Zawinul called me and he said, "Hey man, you did Jocko's record. Jocko really loves the way you play. So we'd like for you to come and be in Weather Report."
Wow.
And I said, Joe, like I just got out of a band that was like a, big band with all-star names and I really like to try and do some of my own music and go out on my own just to see
Mm.
what the water is like. And he understood that. He was cool with that. But yeah, he had asked me to join Weather Report.
That's incredible. Speaking of drummers from Weather Report, I just spoke with Eric Rivette the other
Oh
day.
yeah,
He's
sure.
doing great. Yeah, he's a great drummer. Carlos Santana always said that Eric was Weather Report's best drummer. He just, he felt that. But let's fast forward a little bit. Some of the stuff that you were doing in the 80s, you were playing with everybody. And then one of my favorite things that you did in the late 80s was the Manhattan Project. I love
Mhm.
that, man, with Rochelle Farrell, Stanley, and who else was on that? I think you write a song called, I think, Old Wine and New Bottles or something like that. Man,
Wayne Shorter was on there,
that's right, Wayne Shorter. I love that, man.
and Michelle Petrucciani.
That's right. The late Michelle Petrucciani. Was that your concept? Did you come up with that whole thing again? Like
Yeah,
an encore group?
I was going to do that, and I had originally asked McCoy Tyner to do it,
Wow.
but he couldn't do it, and Michelle was great,
Oh, yes, he was.
and that's Rochelle's first.
That's
Now let me
right.
tell you about Michelle Farrell. I had done a record with a young artist that just had gotten signed to Atlantic Records by the name of Nikki Richards. She had won Star Search,
Okay.
and so I produced her record. And in producing her record, we were trying to get some background singers to sing on some tracks. And Omar Hakim said, "Man, I heard this girl, Rochelle Farrell. You should check her out." Cool. And so called her up, and she came and sang, and it was killing. And I was in the studio doing something, and my son was in the. I was in the control room, and my son was in the studio, and he came into the control room. She said, "You got to hear this girl. This
Yeah.
girl is incredible." Because this was after she had done the session, but she was sitting at the piano and just playing
Right.
and singing.
Right.
And I was like, "Wow, she's bad," this. And so after the session, I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, I just got signed by Bruce Lundvall to do a record, and I'm thinking about doing that." I said, "Well, like if you ever need any information, I mean, any advice or whatever, give me a call." So she called me, and actually, it was the old Mayflower Hotel that's now here in New York, right next to where the Trump Hotel is. But now
Okay.
that's one of the most expensive buildings in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Sting lives there. Some other Alex Rodriguez had a place there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we sat out in front of that hotel for about 2 hours, and we talked about the music business. And she said, "Okay, well, if I do this record, I want you to produce my record." Sure. So I got a call, and sure enough, I produced this record
Wow.
for her. Now, the record was released in Japan, and they didn't want to release it here in the States because her management didn't want her to go out as a jazz singer.
Right.
So it was released in Japan, big accolades, blah, blah, yeah, yeah. It was really cool. So then about a year and a half, about a year later,
Mm-hmm.
George Duke calls me, and George says, "Hey man, you know anything about this girl, Rochelle Farrell?" I said, "Yeah, sure, of course. I just did a record with her." He said, "Yeah, man, they want me to do a record with her now." And I'm just checking. I said, "Yeah, she's bad, man. Check it out." Sure enough, the record comes out here in the United States, and in the press it says, "George Duke discovers new singer, Rochelle Farrell." Now, when I was doing her record,
Right.
one of the tracks that we did when George Benson was still living here in New Jersey, we went to George Benson's studio
Mm-hmm.
to do some overdubs.
Right.
And I introduced her to George. They go out on a tour, and they had the top grossing tour
Wow.
of whatever year that was that they had done together. So Rochelle's first exposure to the world was on the Manhattan Project.
Yeah, and you
So,
know, Lenny, that version of Autumn Leaves that she sings on there was just
yeah.
unbelievable. I was like, who is this? Because that was the first time I heard her too. I says, who is this person, man? And the way she was singing those notes that she was hitting, because I remember Stanley's playing the bass, and at the very end, she hits this note, and Stanley just kind of stops and looks at her. But yeah, that was fantastic, man. I love the stuff that you guys were doing. Now, I wanted to fast forward a little bit to 2005. I was at Blues Alley in Washington, D.C., and you and Buster played there a lot. I think the last time I saw you there was with Stephon Harris and Buster. You guys were there. And in 2005, I was talking to Stanley. Stanley performed there, and we just went in the back dressing room and started chatting. And Return to Forever came up, and I said, Stanley, I says, man, why don't y'all get back together? And he's first thing he said to me, he says, I'm not doing this without Lenny. And he said, Preston, just before he left, he said, Preston, never say never. Boom. Next year, you guys got back together. I says, I don't believe this. I mean, what was that like after 30 years bringing that band together again, going out and touring and playing that music? I mean, what was that like for you, man?
Well, I mean, Preston, here's a really important point. The highest dynamic that there is
Yeah.
amongst humans, this is a higher dynamic than love. It's trust.
Yeah.
When you have trust, magical things can happen.
Mhm.
And what happens is, musically speaking, when you play with people that you trust and they trust you, you get magic.
Mm.
So it didn't have anything to do with whatever problems arose to
Right.
make a split happen.
Right.
But if you ask someone that you musically trust and they ask you to come and do something again,
Wow. Beautiful.
you know that's what happens. And
Yeah.
what you would hope to have happen, and it was cool for a while, but you would hope that like that aspect of the reason or the reason why you would do it again, that trust is what would supersede anything.
Mm.
Sometimes that doesn't happen.
I got you. I understand.
Sometimes that happens for a while,
Hmm.
and then old habits or things start to manifest
Sure.
again, you
Sure.
know.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened. But musically, it was great. I don't know if I'd really want to do that again. I would not mind at all playing again with those individual musicians, but doing
Hmm.
something new.
You know, it's funny. You just made me think of something with Miles Davis in his documentary, Miles Ahead, that he did back in '86. I think someone had asked him, hey, man, why don't you get back together again and play with Tony, Ron, Herbie, and Wayne? And Miles is like, no. He said he wants to play some different type of music. He said, I don't want to look back and play what I played before. He says, I would have a heart attack if I did that. He said, I can't even stand, thinking about that. He said, during that time period, it was beautiful. But I guess if he got back together with the guys, it would be something completely different because he was always looking ahead, you know.
Let me
Um,
explain something. Let's see. I believe a lot of people uh, there's a misconception
mhm,
that surrounds Miles when it comes to that.
mhm.
Everybody talks about Miles saying, I look ahead, I don't look back, I don't want to go back and visit that music, blah 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 blah. That's true. The only difference is that number one, in order to play like Miles Davis, you have to be a musical historian.
Mm,
See, Miles Davis is the only person that played with Charlie Parker and Prince.
mhm.
In order to be able to do that, you have to draw energy from what you did with Charlie Parker and
Right.
apply that to what you do with Prince.
Yeah.
So you have to look back, but you have to be a musical historian to be
Mhm.
able to do that and you would have to have mastered all of the in between. So there's no doubt in my mind that if Miles played with Tony, Ron, Herbie, and Wayne again, of course he would have done that. This is my opinion.
Yeah.
But the fact is, what they did left such an indelible imprint in music and music history
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
since then, music has moved on, not necessarily for the good, but
Right.
it has moved on. But
Yeah.
those guys were such visionaries. You could move on to this point in time and still create something that would be new. They were capable of playing what music used to be, what music is today, and making what music would sound like in the future.
Mm,
Those guys would be able to do that. He
that's right.
wouldn't be able to. He wouldn't be able to do that with everybody.
Right.
And the fact is, when he said he didn't want to look back, he wouldn't want to play with somebody today that tried to play like what he played 50 years ago.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
that's to me a definition of what that is. But when people, Miles never looked back, he looked like, they don't know what you're talking about, man.
Right. Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So
Beautiful, man. That's beautiful. Well, Lenny, listen, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. It's a joy, an honor, and a pleasure, man, for just sharing this space with you. And hang on a little bit, about to end the show, but you've heard it from Lenny White today. And as the saying goes, if the music grooves and makes you move, it must be jazz. I'm Preston Williams with Jazz Talk signing off. Peace.
peace out.